All right, welcome to what would be 19.3 at the moment, the Normans, the Crusades, and all that kind of good stuff. So we're going to start with the Normans. There's lots of Normans in town. They are actually probably descended from these people. Normans is the French term for the Northmen. These are the descendants of the Vikings who landed themselves in the north part of France at Normandy. You remember Normandy Beach from all those World War II movies and video games you've probably seen. So these guys are Vikings. They've settled down and become sort of French, sort of. But they still have some of those Viking tendencies in them. And there is one guy named William of Normandy, who decides to go up and conquer England. And he earns himself the nickname William the Conqueror. Now we have another important date here. This is in 1066. This is really, really significant. So he introduced the Norman way of governing. This means that he declares himself king of all England. All England then becomes his vassalage. That's new. Most of the kings that we've seen so far are kings of one small territory, one small area, but not this guy. This guy is king of the entire place, and so everyone else owes him allegiance. And he proves it. He does a thing called the Domesday Book, which shows up sometimes in pop culture. You do not need to know it, but just in case. It's a census of the people of England, and it's one of the best sources we have about this era. So that's the first important thing. The second important thing is he altered the English language forever. Okay, so all England. By the way, legends of King Arthur emphasize that he is king of all England, not just one little area. And so he is probably partially based on William the Conqueror, or on William the Conqueror's son. The second thing he did was language. Before William the Conqueror, people in England spoke English. Now, you would not recognize Old English. It is a language that you have almost definitely not seen, not been exposed to, and if I spoke it for you, you'd be like, what is he saying? But William doesn't speak Old English. William speaks French. And so French becomes the language of the court. It becomes the part of what the nobles speak. And they don't want the English to say this kind of stuff. Anyone who's anybody speaks French and not English. And so English comes down and it kind of fades out, and French comes in and comes in. So about 47% of modern English is French. Of course, the remaining 53 would be English. So you put these together and you have Middle English, which is a language you would recognize. And as time passes, you have early modern or Shakespearean or Elizabethan English. But this is part of why English is so hard to learn, because it's got such a smattering of French in it. So you learn all the words in English, all the rules of English, and then all of a sudden someone throws this word in and says it says buffet. And you're like, what? It says buffet. It's because so much of our language is French. And so we have the Germanic here, and we have the Romance over here. Remember, Romance because it's descended from Rome, not because it's romantic. We have those two kinds of languages in modern English, and so rules are confusing for foreigners, and they have difficulty learning our language. The second thing is that the Normans did, not William, these are other Normans, is they conquer southern Italy. See, Italy had been controlled, or the southern part of Italy had been controlled by the Muslims. And of course, the northern part was controlled by the Pope, who wasn't so fond of the Muslims cruising in and around and doing whatever they did in southern Italy. So the Pope convinced the Normans to get the Muslims and the Byzantines out and replace them with good old Roman Catholics. And so you see a little bit of bias here. They're still conquerors, they're still ruling people, but at least they're the Pope's kinds of conquerors. So they do that. The next thing you've got to know about is the Crusades. Now, I would love to go into details in these puppies, but it's just not information that you absolutely have to know. The number of Crusades depends on who you ask. Some say there's 11, some say there's 9. There's really 5 important ones, and anyone who argues about the number of Crusades should really get out more. They should get a hobby. Now, causes. What makes these things happen? First we'll do the 2 simple ones. The Byzantines are under attack by the Muslims, and so they ask the Pope for help. And you know at this point that that really requires them to eat some humble pie, as it were. The second thing is, of course, these people want glory and they want gold. They want to be rich. The Crusades, the religious goals, are really pretty secondary in this sucker, no matter what people at the time said. Third, Europe is beset by violence. They have a lot of problems with the knights cruising in, and say you're a knight, you're sitting here, someone's coming past, and they get a little too close. Well, that's really irritating. Now, you're a knight. There's no one to stop you from doing whatever you want. And there are some people, probably most people, who if they can do whatever they want, they will do whatever they want. And so Mr. Knight would just whack this person. Dead. Now, it would be the same result if this person is a little old lady or, say, a nun. Now, the Pope has some issues with this. And so he issues 2 edicts. One is called the Peace of God, and one is called the Truce of God. They say that there are certain times, certain times of the year, and certain places and certain people that knights cannot attack, like nuns and priests and widows. You can't attack people at the time around Christmas, and you can't attack people on holy ground. Highlander fans, that's where that comes from. Now, the Pope convinces the knights to swear to obey the peace of God and the truce of God on holy relics, the remains of the saints. And so they do, but that's not enough. He's got to channel the violence to somewhere he considers more acceptable, which is outside of Europe, to the Middle East, to people who are not Christians, and will get the violence to go towards them. Finally, there is a religious element here. To ignore it would be to just absolutely lie. The religious element is that they feel like the Muslims are polluting the Holy Land. They're coming in, and what kind of unholy things are they doing there? The Christians really worry about this. This is a secondary concern. And the reason we pretty much know that is because the Muslims have been cruising around in the Middle East. They were ruling the Holy Land and had done so for about 400 years. And so this hasn't been a source of strife for 400 years. Remember how old we are as a nation. The year it is now is minus 1776. And you get an idea of how long this has been. This has been a really, really, really long time, and nobody worried too much about it. The Christian pilgrims could come, they could hang out there, it was no big deal. The Muslims were happy to have them come because it's money. People come into the inn and it works. Now, just a little bit on the Crusades themselves. We're not going to talk about them in detail. Like I said, there's kind of 5 major ones, and you do not need to know the details of these 5 major crusades. It just isn't really significant. It's interesting. Unfortunately, if you missed class, you're going to just miss out on that part. I'm very sorry. but that's the way it's got to be. Now the result. The Crusaders brought back knowledge. Oh, by the way, in the end, everything went back to the way it was before. The Muslims were still in control of the Holy Land, and people could still come and say, hey, yeah, hey, we're come to visit the place Jesus is from, and the Muslims are still happy to have him. So the Crusades in the end were a pretty pointless venture, historically speaking, except for these results. So the first is they brought back knowledge. Remember that Europe had gone through a period where you had a group called Vandals who were burning stuff down. That's where the word vandalism comes from. So the Europeans had lost some of their knowledge, but the Middle East had had no period like that. And so the Crusaders brought back a lot of that knowledge back into Europe that had been not so much lost as ignored or forgotten. The second thing they brought back is trade. Not even so much the trade itself, but the desire for the trade goods. One of the biggest things here was the food. People from England, the land of really, really gross food, were suddenly eating this spicy, delicious Middle Eastern cuisine, and they're like, I want more of this. Where can I get more of this? Well, they needed the spices. And so that demand for the spices is going to come back for them, or come back with them. And as you know from learning in the past about European exploration, the thing they're looking for is spices, and there you go. Okay, last, and I don't know if it's least, one of the Crusades, the Fourth Crusade, they essentially got bored. They got tired. And they didn't want to go all the way into the Middle East, and so they sacked the city of Constantinople. Now, the Pope was furious and excommunicated all of them. But the damage was done. Constantinople would never truly recover. And this is going to be the beginning of the end for these people. The city is never going to recover. They're going to get weaker and weaker and weaker until they finally just fail.